The group walked quietly through the forest at a slow pace, their weapons raised in hands as they approached the private grounds. Chris looked to his side. Ghost was still walking a few paces ahead of him. His steps were firm and seemed to know exactly where to go, where to step, even though he had been through and never been there. It was strange, but he could hardly hear his footsteps in the foliage. Behind him was Jill, and then Sherry, and then finally Parker, who volunteered to watch the rear. He swallowed some of his pride. He didn't like when that guy took lead. He was always the one in front but didn't say anything. He just knew when to shut up. A few minutes of walking passed and Ghost signaled for them to stop when a private area appeared in their field of vision. Ghost leaned to the side of the tree and grabbed a pair of binoculars to his side of his waistband, and he quickly looked over his shoulder at Chris, beckoning for him to come closer. "I see a lot of guards at the front, not many at the back. 3 in the front of the mansion, 2 in front of the garage. I counted 5 more inside the mansion. Too many guards, if you ask me," Ghost said, handling the binoculars to Chris, who observed the area. "All I see are soldiers, and that Astrid girl is nowhere to be seen," Chris said, lowering the binoculars. "Either she's underground or she's left the mansion, or maybe there's no Astrid. That's quite normal. Astrid could be just a cover," Ghost said, leaning on slightly overhanging branch. "So what do you think?" Chris asked, crossing his arms. "I don't think the real owner has left the mansion. The car is still in the garage and the helicopter is still there. Underground for sure," Ghost said. "And even if it isn't, we can find snorted and information there." "Right, then let's go in and get behind the garage. The problem will be the cameras and the barbed wire," Chris said, looking at Ghost with an arched eyebrow after he snorted. "Leave that to me," he said, turning to the others, beckoning him for him to follow. Chris stared at him for a few moments until he shook his head and grunted in annoyance, a whispered, "You're fucker," on the lips. They walked down towards the halls, but at a certain distance, Ghost pulled out a small device from his tactical vest pocket, turning off all the cameras that were within his reach. They weren't all the cameras in the mansion. At least the cameras in the back would be turned off. Ghost then pulled a small pointed object from the side of his waistband, inside his belt, and threw it upwards. The object was actually a hook. After checking it was firm enough, he began to climb. From the sheath on his shoulder, he grabbed his knife and cut through the barbed wire. In a matter of minutes, he was already over the wall, with his hand extended downwards. Chris ran towards the wall and jumped. He took 2 steps to the flat surface as impulse, and grabbed Ghost's hand, who pulled him up at the same time as Redfield. "Help them, Redfield. I'll make sure we won't have any mishaps," Ghost said. Jumping down was already raising his rifle. He ran through a small back area. The back door was already closed. A few steps in front of him, there was a dumpster with large bags of garbage still on the ground, and a few steps after that were the wall of garbage that connected to the wall. He turned around and decided to go to the corner of the mansion wall. There were a side view of the part of the mansion. He could see a small board that led to the front of the gates. He saw some guards near the gates. One on the small stone wall, the guard, was walking towards the mansion. Ghost took a few steps back and knocked hard against the wall, then got into position. "Hey, what was that noise?" the guard asked, and Ghost steadied his knife in his hand. After climbing over the wall and hanging himself under the second floor, in Russian, "Huh?" If that guard was local, he'd talk in Swedish. The guard made his way to the back corridor in confusion, seriousness on his features. Ghost jumped down and stabbed him in the neck, pulling his body back shortly afterwards, and grabbing by what the guy had. 2 small grenades, ammunition that wouldn't fit in his weapons. They were modified. Ordinary bullets won't do. He heard the footsteps of the others approaching. He could see Chris staring for a few moments at the body on the ground, saying nothing. "Are we going to kill them?" Sherry asked softly. She didn't really want them to stay alive, but she never killed any her in her life. Not in most people anyway. "Only the ones we need," Jill said, and Ghost grunted in disagreement. "Let's find out where they took Redfield's sister and then kill them all." His words caught their attention. "What? Why? We don't need to kill them all. We don't have time," Jill argued. "Do you want to risk them following us? Do you think they'll just let us take that helicopter? They're terrorist scum, and we're going to kill them all," Ghost said firmly, looking over his shoulders just for a few minutes. You're kidding, Parker said. His eyes slightly narrowed, somewhat disgruntled expression on his face. In response, however, Ghost simply raised his silenced rifle and fired at the 2 guards near the gate, killing them with 2 shots to their head. The fewer of them left, better for us, Ghost said, turning to the group. His eyes were serious, and both Sherry and Chris thought that they saw a few traces of anger that could be cold and blue. Redfield, Sherry, Parker, you're going in for the back as soon as I give the signal. Valentine, you're coming with me. The group fell silent after hearing one of the guards say something inside the mansion. Ghost raised his head slightly and let out an almost imperturbable sigh. Why would we do that? Chris asked, not liking the fact of not being separated at all, let alone Jill anywhere near that guy. We can't go together. It would attract attention. We need speed. Don't get me wrong, Redfield, you're a pretty big guy, as is Parker, and Sherry's capable, but inexperienced, Ghost said, putting his rifle on his back and looking up. On the 2nd floor, window wasn't very high up. It was closed. He would have to break it. Chris didn't answer for some time. With a sigh, he turned to Jill and faced her with a silent question. Fine with me. Let's go, Jill said, approaching next to Ghost. I'll give the signal as soon be ready. They soon realized something was wrong with the cameras, Ghost said, jumping up and holding the small ledge just above the 1st floor window. Pulling up his body, he pushes off the wall and then jumps to the window above, holding on. Supporting his body and fixing his legs, he pulls the window glass aside after inspecting the place. The window was at the edge of a long corridor. To his left was a large door leading to one of the bathrooms. Since it's a bit of a slab, the sink and mirror were visible through the half-open door. A few steps ahead was another door, perhaps to a bedroom, since the office was almost at the opposite direction at the end of the corridor. The gasps in the kitchen curtain didn't hurt much to prevent the office from being visible through the glass walls, so where it would be possible that someone was in the room. There was a dim light casting through the shadow, probably someone in front of the computer screen. He would say that this is where the cameras were being monitored. Ghost pulled from the window a side glass, slightly relieved to find the windows was finally open. He carefully entered the mansion. He froze when he saw one of the guards climbing for the large staircase from the 1st floor. The guard didn't see him, but walked calmly towards the office. Ghost walked slowly down the corridor with his eyes fixated on the guard's back. He heard Jill's grunt from behind him and signaled her to remain silent, without taking the eyes off the target. He approached a glass railing that gave a view downstairs. He quickly observed the situation. There were 3 guards talking in front of the entrance. One guard was leaning on the wall, leading to what looked like the kitchen. The 2 others were sitting there on the leather sofa in the living room, facing an unplugged television. They seemed to be resting. The guard on the head entered the office, crouching down. Ghost turned to Jill. It's likely that they're using the office to monitor the cameras too exposed. The window was wide open. I doubt it's the monitoring room, Ghost said in almost a whisper. So what's the plan? Jill asked, wondering if this guy was good at anything that she's ever seen. She was curious to know how he acted. After all, his style was different, but very effective, and that could be very helpful in the future. Let's make sure that there's already a hidden monitoring room that keeps thinking things are normal, he said, causing Jill to arch an eyebrow in confusion, but not giving the woman time to ask anything. He quickly moved down the corridors, and he saw that the 3 guards in front of the entrance were too focused on the conversation between them to notice they were there. They stood next to the glass wall, watching the movement through the gasps, being able to hear the muffled conversation coming from inside the office. Ghost picked up his knife, and it would be difficult whoever it was, but he noticed them out there. Ghost heard one of them say something, and footsteps were heard approaching the door. He slightly squeezed the handle of his knife in his hand, and at the moment the man put his foot out of the room, Ghost attacked him. Piercing his throat, followed his body to the ground, making the noise as little as possible. Ghost glanced briefly at Jill and nodded. They both had entered the office, where the woman closed the door immediately after pulling the guard's body into the office. The man in front of the computer screen muttered to himself as Ghost approached at a slow pace. But what? The man was abruptly interrupted with a bullet to the head, just below his brain before it registered the body in the front guards in the front gate. Ghost pushed his body out of the chair and looked at the monitors. There were so many cameras scattered around, both outside and inside the mansion, just as he had suspected underground. There were monitors showing the small hideout beneath the mansion, as well as another monitoring room, this time with two men in front of the monitors, as a radio was next to the keyboard, probably to communicate. There were some glass incubators around the place, but it didn't look like a laboratory. It was too small for that. Whatever it was, he would destroy it. Jill arched an eyebrow as he saw Ghost plug in a USB stick into the computer and started typing something on the keyboard. "What are you doing?" she asked, not containing her curiosity. "Make sure they don't suspect anything," he replied. In a matter of moments, the previously blank monitors came back on, showing the guards he had killed, now alive and at their posts. After a few more minutes, the flash drive glowed green, and a small loading screen had been in the corner of the monitor just disappeared, just before Ghost took the flash drive back. "I collected the information they have on the computer. It might be useful, and by the time they realize this looping record, it'd be too late," Ghost said, taking the C4 from his tactical vest and placing it under the table under Jill's watchful eye. "That woman," he pointed to a figure in one of the rooms to his left. The woman was wearing a white blouse and a black skirt, as if it were a secretary of some kind. Considering that she's the only woman in sight, I'd say she's one who operates. She didn't say anything as he passed her, and just followed a few steps behind. Very professional. Chris waited patiently for the agent's signal, at the side of his back resting on the wall next to the door. Behind him was Sherry and finally Parker covering the rear. He'd be lying if he said he wasn't getting impatient with me. It hadn't been long since Jill and the agent entered the mansion, but every second he felt anxious. It was no secret that he cared about Jill. She was much more than just a partner. The fact that she was alone with someone like that agent in the mansion, infested with terrorists, was not very comforting. "Goes to Redfield. The back is clear. Enter quietly," he heard the agent's voice say, and a surprising sigh. He slowly opened the door and ran his eyes around quickly before entering. The door led into the large kitchen, next to the food cupboards. The kitchen was quite large, with a long table in front of it. To his right was a counter with a very large fridge and a stove with a sink next to the wall. To her left there was a body lying on the floor, and Jill, but with her back against the wall, with the boundary between the kitchen and the living room. Crouching down, Chris and the others had walked towards her, ignoring the blood staining the woman's knife. Chris looked at her in a different way, and then when she understood the meaning behind that look, she smiled slightly at him and shook her head, answering the silent question he asked, and leaving a little more relieved. "We're in position," she said, whispered to the earpiece, taking the knife, putting it in its sheath, and backing up the silenced weapon. "Good on free. I'll shoot the guard prop up on the wall next to the door. You take care of that," he said, and Chris signaled for the two behind him to hold position while he and Jill got out of the place to the side. "I'll take care of the one on the left," Chris whispered, and Jill nodded briefly in agreement. 1, 2, free! They all fired at once at the same time. 3 guards fell to the ground, and then a muted thud. "Good," they heard Ghost say, just before they heard 2 noises coming from the side, followed by the sound of something falling to the floor. Only did Chris turn his attention to the room, where he saw 2 more fallen bodies. "Enemies neutralized," Ghost's voice made the group look up and walked around the room, while still holding their weapons. "The elevator's upstairs. It leads to the underground laboratory. You go down there." They looked at the stairs, and their eyes still focused on the figure that Ghost was standing just above the step, watching them, certainly with a rather intimidating figure. "And what do you plan to do?" Chris asked with a serious look on his face. "Very simple. I'm going to turn off the lights. I should be able to get a minute or 2 of cut power, enough time for us to get inside and eliminate the guards. The leader of this operation is a woman, and only one on site," Ghost said, making the small group ascend the stairs at a hurried pace. "Good, then let's get going then," Chris said, taking the lead and walking towards the elevator at the end of the corridor. The operation is quite simple. Get in as soon as the lights go out, eliminate the hostiles, and interrogate the head operation. "I'll be right behind you," Ghost said, not entering the elevator, just watching them with his typical neutral expression as the doors closed. The elevator began to descend, and Chris sighed slightly, glancing over his shoulder at Sherry. "Are you ready?" Jill asked Parker, and I will take care of the hostiles. But there's a possibility that you'll have to take action, he said. He didn't want Sherry to have to pull the trigger, but if it came to it, he wanted to make sure that she was prepared. Yes, Sherry replied, in slight nervousness. It was not a short or very not certain answer, but Chris had to be content with that. Although deep down, she was still trying to get used to it all. Of course she was. She was not from the military. The elevator reached its destination. Just as the doors opened, the lights went out, just as Ghost said. Chris and Parker immediately positioned themselves in front of the doors. Both forced them open as quickly as they could. Soon they grabbed all the night vision goggles from behind their tactical vests and entered the place. 2 men advanced, followed by both women, and they 2 steps behind. Chris and Parker shot the 2 guards near the elevator, eliminated the hostiles. Chris signaled for the door on the left, while he and Parker headed down the corridor. Jill and Sherry followed where he pointed, entering the room that served as a control room. There was where they checked the security cameras, and they both heard the 2 confused men further on, futilely trying to get in the system to turn on again. Jill advanced a few steps and opened fire, killing the 2 men with purest shots. She turned around briefly and ran her eyes over Sherry, who still had her rifle raised. Without saying a word, the woman just put her hand gently on the girl's shoulder, and for a brief moment, before continuing her way out of the place, right behind the 2 men, who were now opening fire in the main room. They heard some screams, both from the guards and from frightened woman. They both approached and the lights came on, and they looked all slightly surprised to see Ghost, with his knife against the woman's neck, now immobilized. It all happened so quickly and simply, they didn't know exactly how Ghost had controlled the lights like that, let alone that he had gone there without having seen them, but they would hold their questions. You must already know how this works, I asked. You answered, depending on how it goes live. You live. Got it? Ghost said, with a cold voice, loud enough for the others to hear. The woman looked startled. Stop. I know you understand me, Ghost interrupted her. After a few moments of silence, the woman clicked her tongue. Her frightened expression turned into an angry one. She faked it well. What the fuck do you want? I'm not going to say anything that... In that case, I'll kill you, Ghost said, taking the USB drive from his tactical vest, extending his arm towards Chris. Put this in the computer, Redfield. The password is my nickname, 703. Chris then took the flash drive and walked towards the computer with Parker, leaving Jill and Sherry further back, charged of watching their backs, even though it was unlikely that anyone would come down there. Who are you? What are you doing here? He asked the woman. He could only wait until Chris got the information, but he was running out of patience and would take time. Time they wouldn't have. I'm Arena. No. The men you killed were mine. We had to hire to guard the place, she answered after a few moments of silence. Hired by who? Ghost asked, checking her for a pistol, she just behind her waist tossing the weapon away. I don't know. We didn't see each other, and whoever it was used a voice modular. Normally I refuse, but this person paid in advance. Guard the mansion? From what? Why? They said that they had some people might try and find them, to get rid of strangers. They didn't tell me why, but as long as they pay, I don't care, the woman said, after which Ghost continued to stare at her. The 2 looked deep down in each other's eyes for a few moments until Ghost moved a few centimeters away. His blue eyes flashed a little, and a brief relief the woman felt was soon replaced by horror as he plunged a knife into her throat. What? Why? Sherry asked, uncomfortable. She lied, he said casually, wiping the blade on the side of his clothes before putting the knife back in his sheath. You said she could live, Sherry argued. Ghost glared at her. I lied, was all he said before turning round towards Chris, ignoring the looks on the face on his back. They've been here for a while. Fuck, for a few years, actually. They've gone under the radar, Parker said, and Ghost crossed his arms. Any place they might have taken little Redfield? The agent asked. Yeah, that is the island, Chris replied, ignoring the little Redfield. They have been coming and going there more often when I go to the market. It also mentions taking patients to a lab or a testing wing. All indications that is there, Chris said, as the image of the island appeared on screen, along with the indication map. Great, Ghost replied, taking the flash drive back. We'll Well, if it isn't my friend Chris. A man's slurred, thick voice came through, drawing the attention to the man who appeared on screen. I almost missed you. Krauser, you should be dead, Chris said, straightening his posture and adopting a more serious expression. Yes, I heard a lot recently, and as much as I like to feel nostalgic, Chris, I have things to do. You are interfering with my work. Not to mention that you didn't even ask me permission to use our equipment, Krauser said. His expression's seriousness seemed to play with his knife on his other hand. Chris was silent for a while, staring at the man's smug expression. You are the one who kidnapped Claire, he almost said in a whisper, almost like an understatement in that question, clenched fists enforced. In response, Krauser snorted in amusement and disdain. You catch on quick, as I suspected, and you and I both know where we came from. Krauser spat on the floor beside him. We could have kept quiet, but I knew you'd come, and since we're going to see each other anyway, I wanted to say that I'm dying to end for you good. Chris snorted at that threat. Funny you say that after kidnapping Claire with your little group of mercenaries. Krauser smiled at that. Oh, that was just business. It's not personal with your little sister. I like you. The talk was good, Redfield, but I have things to do. If you hurt Claire, I swear to God, I'll... He was cut off as Krauser's image disappeared from the monitor. With a frustrated grunt, he punched the table in front of him and leaned his head back down. Before anyone could say anything, the venue's alarm went off. The lights flashed red and the systems went into protection mode. Well, we better go, Ghost said, raising his gun again and walking towards the exit.